People like to say, have a good day, and it's a nice sentiment, but it's a fixed perspective that can put a lot of pressure on us. It's also really hard to define from person to person. What about instead if we ask ourselves, how can I have a better day? At work, at home, in life? That's what this show is all about. The Have a Better Day podcast comes to you from Boon, a personalized coaching platform that helps businesses everywhere to support the whole humans, which are their employees. We have our pulse on what employees are dealing with in today's workplace, and we want to share those insights with you. Welcome to the Have a Better Day podcast. So, a strong onboarding process is so crucial for setting new employees up for success, yet so many businesses struggle to get it right. And we've seen that ineffective onboarding can lead to disengaged employees. We've seen stats out there that are talking about a quarter to 30% of all employees are turning over in their first 60 to 90 days of working with a new organization. So this is such a crucial topic that we're talking about today. And I feel very lucky to be joined by Donna Alexander, who's a former L&D manager at Amazon and has more than 7.5 years of experience working at LinkedIn as well. So she's seen firsthand what onboarding has looked like across some of the world-class organizations in our economy today. So Donna, super excited to have you with us today and able to share your insights. So I think there's a lot of good nuggets and I'm excited to dig in. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
All right. So Donna, maybe we just kick it off, and if you could just tell us a little bit more about how you got into L&D and I guess HR more broadly. We'd love to just hear for the audience a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, for sure. I think like a lot of things in my life, if I'm being totally honest, it was completely accidental. So I fell into recruiting accidentally. And then from there, I was helping to train new recruiters on our team. So I really started to like that part of the new hire journey. And then from recruiting, I moved to LinkedIn. So I was doing sales enablement for LinkedIn's largest global customers, both for the recruiting side as well as for the sales solutions product. And there, essentially, it's just onboarding customers with this product and helping them see not only the value of the products, but also how to be able to spread that onboarding love across the organization. And I was there for just over 7.5 years. And then in my most recent 2+ years, I was at Amazon in the ads business. And there I was really hyper focused on a lot of the HR functions. So the learning and development, the onboarding piece, a lot of facilitation and training, as well as employee recognition. So a lot of happy accidents, but joyful results.
And when you were at Amazon, I was following from afar, just seeing the sheer volume of people that they were hiring during that time, during COVID. I guess, tell me what that experience was like, and just, how do you even think about staying on track with onboarding, maintaining culture, maintaining all of those things that are required with just having an effective onboarding process? What was that experience like?
It felt overwhelming at the very beginning, to be honest, because I was in Amazon Ads international expansion business. So essentially, our line of business was focused on countries outside of the US, as well as the EU5, so the big European countries. So there was over 30 countries, as well as over 800 employees. So it was a lot to consider, because obviously not everybody works the same way. Not every country operates the same way. So when I was thinking about onboarding, really it did boil down to just a few things. So first of all, scale for us was absolutely critical. Like with all of those people, all of those countries, we had to figure out a way to train everybody equitably across the world. Another thing that I think was a really important lesson was all around frequent feedback. So not only at did you like your onboarding plan level, but even minute task level. So every task had a piece of, or an opportunity to provide feedback, which I thought was really, really helpful. Another thing that I really loved about the Amazon onboarding process was a focus on 3 different types of people. So there was the onboarding buddy, which I feel like everybody knows, like this is going to be your friend who will walk you through those first days and help to remove a little bit of that tension or fear.
Yeah.
But then there was also the Amazon advisor. And this is somebody who was a tenured Amazonian, so who had been around for a while, knew the ins and outs, and wasn't going to be able to necessarily help you with the ins and outs of your job function, but more about how to navigate this enormous beast. And then the third category of community that was really encouraged was key Amazonians to meet. And this was designated by your hiring manager. And they would say, based on your job role, these are going to be some of your cross-functional partners, or even just people that we think that you should be communicating with and engaging with to get a better sense of not only the organization, but how you fit in the role. And I think one thing about onboarding that I also realized just sort of going through the process is that onboarding becomes a part of your brand. So in the work that I was doing, people knew that Donna was the onboarding person. Donna was the facilitator. So I wanted to make sure when I was creating these onboarding plans that they felt not only like me, but really they felt human, because it really was a reflection of who I was as an individual.
And Donna, that's all super helpful. And I'm just thinking about like what, just to give people a sense of like the volume of people that we're talking about here. I mean, between the 2.5 years that you were at Amazon, like what was the typical onboarding process in terms of how many people were going into this at a time? And what did the hiring spree look like over the time that you were there, just so we can get a sense?
Oof. So I started in January of 22.
Okay.
And for our org, 56% of people were hired in that year alone.
Wow.
So it was really, really rapid growth. But then unfortunately, we're hit with layoffs as well as a hiring freeze.
Yep.
So it was sort of after that first year, hiring really slowed down to a trickle.
Yeah. And it's interesting. It's a unique time that you started, because I feel like as I look back at just how the economy shifted throughout COVID, it was, okay, aggressively hiring in like 2020, 2021. And I mean, I remember reading reports that Amazon was hiring more than 1 million people across their business. And then all of a sudden, I feel like in June of 2022, as interest rates started rising, it was kind of this pivot of like, okay, well, it's no longer just everybody on a hiring spree. A lot of companies that we were talking to started cutting back on hiring and experiencing layoffs. And it felt like there was all of a sudden this corporate sentiment that now all of a sudden we have all of this excess throughout the organization, and how are we going to go through that process? But nonetheless, having an effective onboarding process in that environment, I feel like it's analogous to a lot of the younger companies that we talk to, where it's, hey, we're rapidly scaling and we don't necessarily have any processes in place today. And, you know, I've seen some stats out there talking about how, you know, 25% to 30% of all people are turning over in the first 60 to 90 days of starting a new job. I guess, what were some of the metrics that you guys were looking at Amazon around, you know, that sort of stuff, and what turnover looked like and how you were dealing with those sorts of things internally?
Well, Amazon loves numbers.
Yeah.
So as far as metrics, they were everywhere. So for an onboarding plan, there was just completion rates. So the plan itself is broken out to 30, 60, 90 days. So you'd be able to check as a manager or as a program manager and see, like, did you meet your 30-day milestone? If not, is there an issue, or is there something that we can do to help you? Beyond that, the other metrics that were being looked at, realistically, they were everything. There were like DEI and inclusion metrics. Like, do you feel like you belong on your team? Do you feel like you belong at Amazon? There were manager metrics. Like, how do you feel about your manager? Like, what does manager satisfaction look like? I also think a lot of the sentiment metrics, like for me, I thought were really, really interesting around, has your opinion of Amazon changed since you've been in seat? And that's one that would be asked 30, 60, 90 days, as well as 6 months down the road.
Interesting.
And then, has your perception of your job changed? 30, 60, 90 days, 6 months down the road. So it was really interesting to be able to see and get all of these real data points around how people were feeling, as well as many, many opportunities that existed for improvement throughout the process.
Yeah. Super interesting. And I'm just thinking back to your comment around how scale was so critical to this whole process. I'm curious for our global customers as they're thinking about onboarding in, I think you said 30 different countries. How do you think about like the cultural differences required around, I mean, your Amazon Buddy system that you mentioned, like how does that look and feel different in, you know, say the US versus Europe versus Asia or wherever you're onboarding, and then the skills and training element of it, they're the, I guess, more of the technical skills element of it as well. Like how did those cultural aspects come into play, or are you able to just kind of effectively manage by relying on the, you know, disparate management in those different areas where you guys are having the onboarding? Like what were those cultural differences like?
They were big because the countries being represented, like there was a team in Chicago, for example, but there's also a team in Sweden and Singapore, all of APAC. So there was differences for everything, including holidays. So one of the things that I recognized when I started, and one of my first tasks that I was given was actually to revamp the onboarding that was being done. And quite honestly, it was something that was desperately needed because the onboarding plan that I received was the same onboarding plan that account executives were receiving, that sales managers were receiving. And so it was definitely necessary to start thinking through how do we scale, but personalize at the same time. So one of the things that I did in month number 1 was I didn't touch the onboarding plans at all from like a revamping perspective. I just did my own. Like I followed my own plan. But what I did was I talked to all of the country managers across all of the locales that we were working in to get a sense of what are the things that are most important for them. Also to get a sense of what are the products that they're dealing with, because even though everybody was under the as umbrella, product availability differentiated by location. So then I was able to quite simply put things in buckets and figure out that, okay, so Mexico and Brazil operate the same, but Sweden and Amsterdam operate the same. So now I could do a plan for you, and then just being able to find some of those similarities. So from that point, I was able to create one scaled onboarding template, but just modified for some of the different locales. And that worked to be able to give everybody not only the product training they need, but it also felt like it was made for them and not just something that was given to everybody. And you can ignore these pieces because they don't apply to you. Like I always felt like that was a bad feeling as an employee. I was like, well, if I'm supposed to ignore it, why did you put it in? Like, just get rid of it.
Not personalized to me. I feel like, you know, we can do better than that. Especially in this day and age where it feels like every aspect of the employee experience is all about personalization and really making it tailored. So it sounds like you came in and you went through your own onboarding process, which was the same as an AE or, you know, various roles that might have not been totally relevant. What were some of the biggest pitfalls that you saw in not just Amazon's onboarding process, but how you think about onboarding more broadly and kind of how that looks across the industry?
I love this question. And I did think about it real hard. And I think that it comes down to 3 things. Colloquially, and you could cut this if you need to, I call them the 3 asses because they're all about 3 assumptions, essentially, is what they are. So the first is the assumption of understanding. So when you're creating your onboarding plan, maybe you assume that your new hire knows exactly what their role is. They know exactly who their cross-functional partners and teammates are. They know exactly what the company does. But if we're thinking about things as simple as the account manager and account executive title, that means different things in different organizations. So don't assume that because you had a conversation with them during the hiring process months ago, that they still know exactly what it is you're thinking, especially if you're in an organization that's going through rapid change. So get rid of that assumption. The second assumption I would say is uniformity. And that goes back to we'll have one plan for all roles, and we're not making spaces for nuances, personalization, or localization. I think that's a really, really big miss. And then also the assumption of perfection. We built this onboarding plan. It took us 2 months, but like now we're done.
Right.
So we don't have to do anything else again.
Right.
Like we're finished here. And I think that those three assumptions they can be really, really damaging to the employee experience, but also to the business as a whole in terms of the things that they're looking to accomplish.
Yeah. The three asses. Hope you got that, audience.
Trademark.
No, I love those. And I think, with Amazon in particular and any large organization, it is kind of what is that happy balance between personalization and scale? Because I do feel like there's a little bit of friction there as you're thinking about those two things. And, around this idea of, okay, set it and forget it. I feel like everything you do is all about constant iteration and improvement and just having that mentality. And I feel like Amazon operates through that lens as an organization. So it feels like it would be on brand for them to bring that into their onboarding process. And I guess I'm just curious, like, as you saw some of these assumptions come into play, and, I guess in your previous life as well, what are some of the impacts that you saw on things like employee engagement and productivity, turnover? I mean, you mentioned metrics that you guys are tracking. Yeah. I guess, did you have insight into like how these asses impacted any of those sorts of metrics that you might be tracking as an organization?
So when I think about how it really impacts the employee experience, I think each assumption impacts the experience in a very different way. So with the assumption of understanding, if the objective isn't understood, if it hasn't been localized, then there's a lack of awareness by the employee and how they contribute to the org's vision. So as an employee, I won't be my most productive. And you'll see that when it comes to things like time off. Yeah. You'll see that when it comes to things like responsiveness, just pure engagement, like, are they responding to emails? Yeah. When it comes to the assumption of uniformity, that really does impact disconnection. So if tasks and content, if they're not relevant, then that can be really, really damaging an experience as well. So I've worked for American-based companies for the past 10 years. In my onboarding plans, I would always get information. Here's what to do for your 401k. I don't have one because we don't have those in Canada. Or you should join this military ERG. Yeah. Again, we don't have that in Canada. Yeah. So it makes me feel as an employee that I'm not engaged and kind of like you don't care about me. Yeah. And then with the assumption of perfection, if there's no feedback loop for changes or improvement or errors, as an employee, I feel like my voice isn't being heard, so I don't feel like I belong. And that's, I think, when you'll definitely see a lot more of people taking steps back and not engaging in social activities or any activity designed to create community amongst the teams.
Yeah. And were each of these locales, I know Amazon has been making a big push to go back into office, at least in the US. Were each of these locales, were they remote or were they back in office at the time?
The official return to office started in May of last year.
Got it.
So the guideline was 3 days in office for each employee per week.
Got it. Awesome. And I mean, you've kind of given some really good nuggets around what worked well for Amazon and thinking about their onboarding process. I guess for the HR leaders who are listening to this more broadly, I mean, Boone works a lot with smaller organizations that are out there. I mean, not every company is an Amazon behemoth. You could probably count on one hand the number of companies that are as large as Amazon. So, for the people who are thinking about effective onboarding strategies for like the SMBs of the world, call it 50 to 1,000 or even a little bit smaller or larger than that. Like, what are the 3 to 5 things, and maybe some of it does carry over from Amazon, but what are 3 to 5 things that you would say are like absolutely essential to delivering an effective onboarding experience for new employees, especially in this remote hybrid world that a lot of companies seem to be in today and moving forward?
I think that the first one has to be a bit of a state of the union. So I think when you are at like whatever size company, but if you've got everybody in office, it's easier to get a vibe for the place, and easier to get an understanding of, you know, things that are important, because you'll hear it at like in the kitchen, or you'll get a vibe or something from somewhere, like a small side conversation. I think if you've got people who are working remotely or hybrid, you have to be really, really intentional. So I think a state of the union around, this is what our team does. This is what our org is striving to do. This is what our company's mission and vision is. And that should be reconfirmed many times over, because I think that when it comes to starting, you know, day one as a new hire employee, you do have to remember that a lot of times there is a good chunk of time between when the interview started and somebody's boots being on the ground. So when I was at Amazon, my interview process started in November, but I didn't start the new role until mid-January. That's a lot of time. And I'm not going to say I forgot about all the things from the interview, but you do definitely, like, please reconfirm that this is the direction that we're heading in, so I can be on board. Secondly, role expectations. So going back to what I mentioned around things like job titles, like what does an account executive at Amazon as international expansion look like? Like, what are the things that we are trying to accomplish? What are some of the gaps and things that we haven't done well in the past that, you know, based on my skill set, that I would be able to improve upon? And then along with that, you should also make sure that you got the milestones, because I think that there's a lot of cultures and a lot of companies that are really chasing that self-service model. But I think it's also incumbent on the new hire to be able to say, I'm tracking for myself so that I know if I'm doing a good job or not. And then I can reconfirm that with my direct manager. So having those milestones and those steps for success is really critical. And I would also say with that, a lot of onboarding plans stop at 90 days, but I feel like it's day 91 where things can change, because day 1 to day 90 is when you're learning and you're absorbing. Day 91 is, am I still going to be here in 91 more days? So making sure that you're having those check-ins is going to be really, really critical. I think as well, community. Especially for remote workers, like, you need to figure out a way to create a community and have those individuals feel connected, not only to the team, but to the org and its people. Because sometimes if you're just sort of sitting in your corner of your apartment and you're not talking to a real human being for what can feel like a couple of days, if not longer, that can be really, really isolating. So you need to figure out a way to make that person feel human again, to be honest. And then also, as I'd mentioned before, feedback is always going to be really critical. So at the Amazon onboarding plan, there was feedback links for every single task. So being able to alert for, you know, things like a broken link, but you could also write in feedback around, I don't think that this particular task works for this job, or this might be outdated. Can you update it to drop in a new link here? And so it feels a lot more collaborative. And then when people see those changes, they feel like they're part of the process, which then again makes them feel connected and like they're helping.
And you know, I think one of the biggest use cases that we've seen for Boone since starting the business has been like new employees who don't necessarily feel the support from day one, where, hey, I'm getting this onboarding toolkit and maybe I am part of a town hall where the company's telling me about their mission, vision, and values, but like, that's not personalized to what I'm going through. And I might be feeling a lot of anxiety around, hey, I'm a new manager that just got hired, and I don't really feel comfortable talking to my new manager around the things that I should be doing, or there are always some periods or some elements of safe space that might be required that might not be solved through this, you know, water cooler type talk with folks across the organization. So I guess any good tips around just like really being intentional about creating that welcoming and inclusive environment for folks?
Yeah. So personalization, we've talked about.
Right.
I think if you're working multinationally or globally as well, thinking about things like language, one of the things that I used to use a lot at LinkedIn, which I found to be incredibly beneficial, was PowerPoint Live, because that way I could deliver in my language, but then the learners would be able to get the translation in their local language.
Love that.
So everybody was able to excel together, and I didn't have to learn 75 different languages. Also thinking about things like holidays and observances. Like, this has happened more times than I can count, but is it ever annoying to be able to get one of those calendar invites around, like, we're having a town hall on this day, like we moved it from this day because it's a US holiday, but now it's on a Canadian holiday. So think a little bit bigger and make sure that you're not scheduling across those holidays and observances. I think the community building piece, like that key Amazonians to meet section, I think is really, really critical. Like, having managers say, these are the people that you could be partnering with, I think was really, really helpful. But it also helped me as an employee to understand these are the people who are experts in this product or process. So if I ever have a question, I basically just constructed this big Excel spreadsheet of all of the people who I talked to, and I knew I'd be able to go to for information at the drop of a hat. And then finally, I think something that it feels like has kind of fallen out of favor or is being talked about less since June of 2020, which I think is shameful, DEI. So diversity, equity, inclusion. Being able to introduce the employee resource group so people know where they can go for people who look like them and have those same experiences. For the teams that I've been on, probably more times than I can count, I've either been the only woman on the team or the only Black woman. And being able to find a group of other Black people who understand what something feels like was really, really important. But I think as well, in your onboarding plans, you should be sharing your company's DEI vision. So what is it that we stand for? What does inclusion mean for us as an organization? And how can you, as an employee who's joining us on this journey, help to support that?
I think that's all super valuable. And I think we've actually seen that with our own coaching with women and Black women in particular, where it's been, hey, I want to work with a boon coach who can share some sort of life experiences with what I'm dealing with personally. And so it's like, how do you provide that and make that employee feel like it's personalized and inclusive to them? And obviously that becomes harder and harder as you scale, but really important things to think about. And I guess along the same lines of, thinking back to your Amazon days, but maybe applying that to a smaller business where maybe you don't have access to, the loads and loads of data that you may have at Amazon. What would you say are like the top 3 to 5 things that you're like, okay, these have to be tracked, maniacally throughout the onboarding process?
I would say training completion. So especially if you're dealing with any types of products. So like, did people do the training on Salesforce? That should be pretty much a given. I like tests, quizzes, and assessments. I think that those are really helpful to understand, because if you see across the board that everybody is getting the same question wrong, then it should make you think, okay, so what information are we not providing? It can't just be, oh, they're all dummies. It is, okay, this should be a data point that we're using to make improvements. Although sometimes they can be dummies, like, let's be honest. Kidding. But then you should also be looking at things like your milestone completion or your time to productivity. So how many days to ramp to productivity divided by your total number of new hires. That will give you a good sense of, are these people and are these new hires, meeting our benchmark? And I think it's really important to have an understanding of what your benchmark is. You can't just assume it's going to take everybody 90 days. Some people might be able to get things in 60. Some people might take 120. So I think that having the flexibility, especially for different learners, is going to be really, really important. And then also like just surveys and NPS. So getting a sense of not only like, how do you feel about your onboarding plan, but how do you feel about your job? How do you feel about your team? How do you feel about your manager? And how do you feel about the culture of the company?
I think those are all great things. And I think, even as a small business owner right now, I can tell you, we don't have most of those things in place, and we should. So I feel like this is stuff that's tangible that you can take back into your workplace tomorrow. And I think, along a similar lens for the HR leaders out there that are looking to revamp their onboarding experience, kind of like you had the opportunity to do at Amazon, what would you say are like the top 3 recommendations or pieces of low-hanging fruit to really focus your energy on first to start creating some meaningful traction? Like, I guess, revamping a program, where do I start?
I think you start with feedback. And I felt like that was the most helpful piece that really helps me when it came to the onboarding plan. So speaking with those country managers and saying, okay, like, what are the things that you're seeing of your new hires?
Yeah.
Like, what are the gaps that really need to be addressed? And that helped to really turn the tide really, really quickly, just being able to get the answer. So I think starting with the people who will be essentially receiving the new hires and getting their feedback. But then I think also you should be engaging with previous new hires. Like, what are things that you wish you'd known sooner? Like, what are things that were missing for you, and how can we help to speed things up? So I think that those are really 2 of the easiest conversations that you can have.
Love that.
And then plus it helps to build not only your brand, but also the trust you have with the partners that you're working with.
Yep. Love that. And any good resources that are like easily accessible for this sort of thing, I guess, as a helpful guide to just get started with this?
Yeah, I will say that all of the work that I have been doing across like both LinkedIn and Amazon has all, for the bulk of it, has been self-sourced. So these are things that I'm finding, like, I think going to conferences are really good. So I went to, for example, like the Work Human conference, all around like employee experience and recognition. So lots of good nuggets there, as well as networking with people who have gone through these things and being able to skip the bad parts and just get right to the good. That's really, really great. One tool that I think for me was just wonderful to use through the onboarding plan. It's called Toonly. So Toonly.
Toonly.
And it will help you easily create these explainer videos. So essentially you cartoon yourself, and I use those to introduce the different parts of the onboarding plan. So it's like, here's Donna in cartoon form saying, hey, you're a new hire. Welcome. We're so excited that you're here.
Oh, wow.
And it was easy, but it felt different than just look at this screen for the next 5 hours.
Yeah.
Like, it's something a little bit more interesting.
Yeah.
I also leverage groups on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So the Employee Communications, Engagement, and Experience group has over 70,000 people in it, and there's a lot of good information shared. There's the Linked HR group that has over 1.5 million people who are having conversations about things like the employee journey. And then I think, just for balance, you should also be checking out the Emotional Intelligence Network group on LinkedIn, because we need to make sure that we're balancing health and well-being along with the productivity pieces of the work that we're doing.
Yeah. I love that. And, something else that's been really good for us, but you're kind of making me rethink it with the Toonly comment, which is Loom. And making Loom videos as part of, more of the tactical training element of this. And they just actually rolled out this crazy new AI experience where you can actually just literally record a video and then click a button and it creates an entire SOP around that sort of thing. So we found that to be super helpful as well, but I'm going to have to check out Toonly. That's really interesting.
I wish I had a referral code. I could be making mad money for this.
Yeah, exactly. Especially after after everybody that's listening to this, there's going to be a lot of Toonly downloads. But I guess, speaking of which, Donna, where can somebody listening to this, where can they find you?
Should be no surprise, but I'm on LinkedIn, especially as a former employee. But you can find me at either Donna Alexander in the search bar. Basically, my face looks like this. Or in the link, you could just type in Alexander Donna, all one word, and that will take you directly to my profile.
Awesome. All right. Well, this was super helpful. And I guess as a business owner of a small business, I know I took away some really helpful nuggets to bring back to my own company. So Donna, thank you so much for spreading your knowledge, and I'm looking forward to staying in touch with you. This was awesome.
Yeah. And thank you so much for inviting me. This has been great.
Yeah. All right. See you later. Take care.